I know Dr. Oatis because I know Dr. Oatis's mom. It was a pleasure to know Ruth Oatis. One of my first experiences with Dr. Oatis's mother was several days after I was appointed in my position at the YWCA as CEO. And my phone rang, I answered it, and it probably was one of the best things I could have did that day, despite the workload. But on the other end of the phone was this little raspy voice that was as spunky as a spunk could be that said, "Oh my goodness, the YWCA has done the best thing it ever could have done. They have hired their first African American to lead the agency." She went on to tell me about how she was involved in the agency. As humble as she was, I had no clue what that really meant, but she invited me to her home. I, several days later, took her up on that offer, went to meet Ruth Oatis, and instantly, it was a bond beyond really belief. She took me into her kitchen. We pulled out boxes and boxes of archives of how she was so instrumental in the civil rights movement back in the 60s, so much so that she was involved in demonstrations. She had helped orchestrate Black people being allowed to swim at our YWCA. She helped integrate cafeterias back in the day. I would have thought she had Dr. Martin Luther King's personal phone number, the way she spoke of her work in the movement. And then, of course, she told me about her Pam. And so I knew instantly that the same blood of allyship that ran through Ruth Oatis would certainly transfer over to her daughter. And so it has just been a pleasure to be acquainted with Dr. Oatis all these years, and it's a joy to have her here today. So before I jump off the screen, there's a couple of things that the speaker has asked us to do. There is a chat box function that we have disabled. What we want you to do is please use the Q&A box. It should be down in the lower portion of your screen. If there are comments or questions, just feel free to drop it in that little box. We are recording the session, as Marla just reminded us when she turned it on. And so if for any reason you want to refer back to this video will be on the YWCA website, as well as the website of Healthy Lucas County. Excuse me. In addition to that, Dr. Oatis will be speaking from slides, and she has been gracious enough to allow us to have a copy of her presentation, and we will also have that posted on our website. All right, I think I am able to get out of the way. Dr. Oatis, it is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We have a lot of stories about my mother that yet to be told. And I do want to start off by saying my thank yous to Lisa for inviting me, to Marla for organizing us. And I hope you can find your family's cultural and ethnic background language here somewhere. My German and English are here. The Gaelic is not, so we could improve this, but hope you find yours. I also want to say thank you to Jan and Healthy Lucas County, and of course to the YWCA for so many years of their commitment to ending racism and empowering women. So I know that you all are experts in healthcare disparities. I'm not going to bore you with any historical data, but I did find in my pediatric literature that just comes across my desk unavoidably, a couple of new studies that I thought you might want to know about. And this one is from 2020, the National Academy of Sciences, based on chart review of 1.8 million hospital birth records. That's a lot. In Florida, that showed that Black babies were 3 times more likely to die in the hospital than white babies. And that disparity is cut in half when the Black babies are cared for by a Black doctor. That's a very big deal and something to take note. Unfortunately, only 5% of the doctors that we have in the US are Black. Nowhere near enough to cover our African-American population. The institutional factors are implied in this data and not also to be ignored. Another study looked at disparities in autism spectrum diagnosis. Again, a large study of 584 Black children. And this was just published in the Journal of Pediatrics, which is our hallmark, our cornerstone journal for pediatric research publications. Seeing that they weren't diagnosed until they were 5.6 years of age, mean diagnosis is understandably late. And obviously many parents tried, by the data here, they tried to get diagnosed and they weren't. So that is a problem for treatment, as we all know. The earlier we're diagnosed, these children, the better they can do. So our disparities are not over. These are some myths that we white people get to face as myths. We've heard them. We've probably had the thoughts come in our own minds. We've certainly seen them spoken explicitly, and we've seen them spoken implicitly in too many places too often. Oh, I do want to point out one term here. I will be using the term global majority rather than using the term minorities or people of color. The facts are people of color are the global majority of humans on the planet. So to be using the term minority is only effective if we're speaking of a specific location and specific numbers. But I think a perspective for me of global majority writes things in my own mind for the way things are in our world. So we have a great opportunity. And I will say that I haven't been this hopeful about our progress toward making structural as well as personal changes related to racism since the 60s and 70s. And as Lisa described, my mother was on the forefront. And she was alone. She lost a lot of white friends. She grew up in Toledo. Her circle of friends were white. Her circle of friends grew during those 60s and 70s, but they grew in spite of the fact that she lost white friends. She brought as many along as she could, but everyone was not ready. The beauty of the movement that we have now is that it's very deep and broad, and it's worldwide. And I was certainly a participant in the early 70s when I was at home with my parents, with my mother, and when I went to college. But the movement now is ever stronger, which is very, very hopeful and exciting to me. So the first thing we need to do is to face the facts, the ravages, the horrors, the fear of racism in our brothers and sisters of the global majority, especially those of African heritage. We need to face these without pretending at all. And those of us that are white can go home and usually sort of turn that piece off, unlike our brothers and sisters who can't, who can have their homes invaded. And I have a friend who just had the police knock on her door at 2 o'clock in the morning, would not say who they were. They were there to return a driver's license of someone whose driver's license they had taken unnecessarily and totally disrespectfully earlier in the day. These are African-American friends who law-abiding, marvelous citizens in Toledo. So I don't have that same fear where I sleep and live. This is a video that Marla's going to help us watch. She's going to be sure we get to watch, that will help us notice and see and experience the effects of racism on African-American students.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
Because you think I got into Georgetown due to affirmative action.
Because my experience as a student athlete will never be the same as my white counterparts.
Because my life only matters to a cop when I have the name Georgetown across my chest.
Because being a black female student athlete at a predominantly white institution means not only that I have to prove my worth on the court, but I also have to prove my worth in the classroom, and I also have to prove it as a person walking on campus.
I can't breathe because you're afraid of me.
I can't breathe.
I can't
I
breathe.
can't
I
breathe.
can't breathe when you tell me that I'm pretty for a black girl.
When you ask me if this is all my real hair or if it's weed.
When you assume you know who I am before we even have a conversation.
When you constantly whitewash my identity.
When you judge my intelligence based off the city I'm from. When I'm judged off the color of my skin, and not by my mind, and the kindness of my heart.
When you ignore these issues because they don't directly affect you.
I can't breathe when I walk in our locker room and I'm the only one who looks like me.
When I'm only acknowledged when I succeed.
When you decide to explain away racism.
When my athleticism is attributed to my race instead of my hard work.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe when my roommates, who also happen to be my teammates, have guests over. And when I enter the house, their guests give me weird looks, as if I'm not supposed to be there.
When my coach refers to the 3 black girls on my team as the sisters, and my teammates laugh and think it's a joke.
When faculty and administration speak to me as if I don't belong at Georgetown University.
When I realize my peers and teammates within Georgetown athletics can go all 4 years without having a structured conversation about race and inequality.
When we can have a conversation one-on-one, but when you're in a group with your friends or we're in a different public setting, you act like I don't exist.
I can't breathe.
When I think about attending a university, my fellow black student athletes and I feel less than or less deserving of our education than others.
When you determine my identity for me.
When my experiences and perspectives are belittled by my peers and classmates.
When you say things like,
I don't really count because I'm only half black.
Or you talk white.
When someone tells me that I speak well, and then I don't speak like the others.
When you tell me that you sometimes forget that I'm black.
Telling me that you're more black than I am because you like to listen to rap.
How did you get into Georgetown? Oh, it must be because you play football.
I can't breathe. When slavery or black people is mentioned in class, and all eyes turn towards me.
When someone says something racist or stereotypes my people, but then tells me I'm different.
I can't breathe when I'm looked at as a threat.
Someone clenches their purse or moves as far away as possible.
When black students are looked at as the dumbest on the team.
My aspirations in life are diminished by people who assume I'm incapable of certain accomplishments because of the color of my skin.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
I can't breathe.
So help me breathe.
Help me breathe.
Help me breathe.
Georgetown Athletics help me breathe by providing structured, formal conversations about race and inequality in America.
By recognizing our devotion and our commitment to the university, not only as black students, but black athletes as well.
Make a commitment to recruiting more black athletes.
By acknowledging that my life matters outside of the name Georgetown.
By listening and understanding the struggles that each and every one of us go through.
By understanding that not just me, but everybody within my race is going through a struggle for equality that you can help with.
So help me breathe.
By listening and trying to understand my story.
By taking a step back and making a real effort to understand my side of the story.
By understanding that the only difference between me and you is our backgrounds.
By understanding where we're coming from and standing with us.
By building all people up, not tearing them down.
By spreading more love than hate and becoming more educated on what it means to be a black person in America.
By educating yourself and listen with an open mind.
By checking your prejudices and educating yourself and those around you so that we don't have to carry the burden all on our own.
By calling out the stereotyping of black bodies when you hear or see it.
By not assuming all black men are a threat.
By speaking up against those stereotypes and microaggressions that affect our lives on a daily basis.
By eliminating the stereotypes that all black women are not supposed to be well-spoken, educated, or just simply beautiful.
By recognizing your privilege.
By using your position of privilege to acknowledge these differences and address race in your circle of influence.
By acknowledging me when I'm also at my lowest.
By being slow to judge the people around you.
By getting to know me first before you judge me by the color of my skin.
Help me breathe.
By not assuming that all black people are the same.
By not assuming I am a threat solely because I am a black man.
By seeing me for who I am.
Help me breathe. Don't be a bystander. Speak up and stand against racial injustice.
Thank you, Marla. Sobering and hopeful as they told us what we can do. And I think it's also helpful to realize that we learned racism. We weren't born with it. It was instilled in us by people and a culture and families, our schools, our places of worship, our clubs. Everywhere we went sort of dripped in the lies of racism, the misinformation that had been handed down for many, many generations. These are not bad people. We're not bad people. None of us are bad people. We are people who have made mistakes. We've been confused and we've done some bad things, but that does not make us bad people. And we have opportunities to face this. The first step is to face what we were taught and what our next steps are. Jennifer Eberhardt, I can't say her name without smiling. She's one of the many Black women that have taught me in my lifetime, that I have learned to follow and back in their leadership. She did groundbreaking work on implicit bias related to race. So we have explicit bias and we have implicit bias. And the implicit bias is we've commonly known as stereotypes. They're subconscious, it's not deliberate. It's from these cultural messages that were dripped into our minds from the moment we were born. We were born into circumstances that taught us things. And this is all based on neuroscience. I love this. It's how our brains work. Our brains receive millions of bits of information every day, and we have to find patterns. We as humans have had to find patterns so we know when to fight, or when to flee, or when to make another decision. So these patterns have come about for a very, very good reason. And what we need to do is face that these pieces of implicit bias have ended up in our minds, and they leak out like toxic waste. Whoops, let's see. I didn't want to go over that. Wait a minute. Sorry, I have to go. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm doing there we go. Sorry, we'll go back. Okay, so as this implicit bias is leaking out, it's in communication, as we're building relationships, and a lot of my relationships have to do with healthcare. Most of our communication, we use words, but so much is our body language. And this story of a well-intended physician saying, of course I'm listening to your expression of spiritual suffering. Don't you see me making eye contact, striking an open posture, leaning towards you and nodding empathetically? Yes, she does see that, but what she also sees is the scowl behind the smile. And I think we've all experienced this from both ends, So we get to face some more research that Jennifer Eberhardt did, which is the denial of this racism that got dripped into our precious minds simply draws attention. It doesn't fool anyone. That pretending and hiding doesn't fool those that we are trying to protect. I will confess that this being how I do keep house an awful lot of the time, but it doesn't work in housekeeping any better than for implicit bias. The good news is that Jennifer Eberhardt also showed that these stereotypes don't have to be permanent, but it does take intention, it takes attention, and it takes time. And this is not a sitcom. We didn't get this way in a 30-minute sitcom, and it won't be over in one or even an hour. This has happened over generations, and it will take our time personally and as a society to make changes. So we're going to have another video. Now, this is from a YWCA in St. Louis, Missouri. A friend of mine, who you'll see two actually friends of mine, two Marys in this video. The first clip is from 2015 when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, which is just north of downtown St. Louis. And then they came back this spring to check in on that same YW. Thank you, Marla.
Americans to consider issues of race with a fresh urgency, but coming to grips with our own attitudes can be a challenge. It's one addressed in a groundbreaking book, and in the workshops, it is now inspired. Together, they've helped thousands of people look deep into themselves as they look to change the world around them.
I can't breathe. Black Lives Matter. George Floyd.
Across this nation, outrage wears many colors.
My sign says white silence equals white violence because white people are the people oppressing black people.
This show of recognition that racism is real has taken on renewed life in white people. From protests in the past, the marches, the freedom rides, the size and number of people of all races on the street has grown. An extension from the unrest in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 after Michael Brown was gunned down by a white police officer.
If these were our white sons being stopped like this, that would not be tolerated.
That's when we first discovered a small bi-monthly support group inside the St. Louis YWCA.
The whole region has a race problem.
It was called Witnessing Whiteness, and in true AA fashion, they acknowledge who they are and who they seek to be.
I think by having a group that's just white, we can ask what people may consider the dumb questions.
Questions about bias through history, white privilege, and systemic racism. And 5 years later, they're still at it.
It has grown. I think when you came to see us, we were on our first sort of upward swing.
We caught up with them to get their thoughts on what they've learned and reaction to what's happening now. Mary Ferguson was a group facilitator in 2014.
We don't have to know exactly the right thing to do. We just have to resist what are some of the things that we know are wrong to do. We have to change our mindsets and our behavior.
Bill Gilbert has been witnessing whiteness since 2011.
You look at from Michael Brown to George Floyd, what lens are you seeing this through, having done this work?
That's a good question. Not a whole lot has changed, actually. I've been through many classes, many programs, and I learn something every time. I'm pretty smart, but I just can't, I can't be in a black person's shoes, and I just have to, in order to understand better what's going on, I need to hear more and talk more and listen a lot more.
In 2008, Dr. Shelley Teklick understood that need and penned Witnessing Whiteness, her how-to guide on anti-racism.
This was born out of this idea of wanting to help myself and then therefore help other people to know all those nooks and crannies of how racist conditioning has gotten into us so that we can actually recognize it, stop it, name it when it's happening in front of us, and do something to move us toward justice.
Sounds like this is a form of lifelong therapy.
It is. This is absolutely a healing journey.
Undoing the 400-year momentum of systemic racism won't be easy, but these Americans, including Mary Dinsmore, are committed.
Doing like the internal work of white anti-racism work is something that I'm just going to need to be doing my whole life, and hopefully if enough of us do it, it can make a bigger change, so we can make bigger systemic change, like what we really need.
Mary Ferguson said the group paused sessions when the outbreak started, but this week they started those talks back up again via Zoom. I asked Dr. Shelley how someone would begin such a hard conversation with a loved one or a friend. She told me you start with an invitation, not finger pointing. Dana?
Michelle, I'm so glad you revisited them. A couple weeks ago, I said to you, I didn't have the words. I didn't even know how to ask the questions. And so to see some of this is eye-opening for so many of us. You know, we have to be uncomfortable maybe to figure some of this out.
Yeah, being uncomfortable, it's not easy, but it's well worth it.
Would you believe a few simple changes in your diet?
Thank you, Marla. So, yes, this is an opportunity for us to end racism together. This is not a solo event. We face, we feel, as they talked about, feeling uncomfortable, and that feeling uncomfortable, it grows as we really face the ravages of racism. In not just in small things, but in huge things. The school to prison pipeline that I have seen as a pediatrician that begins in preschool with fearful Black children, especially boys, who are labeled violent in preschool. This is 3-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, expelled from preschools because of their fight or flight behavior, because they are so fearful. That begins the school to prison pipeline. The layers of this are enormous. And to the extent we are building new associations with beloved Black family members, close friends, whose living rooms and kitchens we frequent, our heartbreak is significant. The tears we need to cry are significant. And that is the healing that we need to do. The healing comes, with the healing comes fresh thoughts, fresh creativity, closeness, and building our world the way we actually want it to be. And we need safe places, as Mary Ferguson has created in her YWCA in St. Louis, and I'll get Lisa talking about our YWCA soon. But we can do this with just another person as well. It can be with a family member, a friend, to just take turns listening. What is our story? What do we carry from our own childhoods? And to listen with compassion, with respect, genuine caring, and confidentiality, so that we have a place that we can say the things, as they talked about, that feel bad, to tell our own stories. And we can do this with a partner, a peer, which will drain some of our confusions, drain some of our feelings that come up and spill over in ways, and that's when the toxic waste leaks out when we're with our clients that we want to be genuinely caring about and not trying to hide any of our own confusions. I love this quote. Glennon Doyle Melton is an author activist, and I often think of this and feel like I'm a mess, because I do cry a fair amount in designated, set aside times, and I also laugh a lot. And I think it is because I am aware of what's going on in the world and care, and have safe places to do that. So equity, again, as Lisa talked about, equity is about fairness and impartiality. And, you know, you have to indulge me, I'm a pediatrician, and we and children like pictures. So for me, these pictures, the ones of the people on the bicycles, well, they all got a bicycle, but if you're in a wheelchair and you're given that kind of bike, it doesn't work very well. And if you're given shoes and they don't fit, well, that also isn't very useful. We need to be looking at equity. And eventually, and if I were doing this drawing, the reality would be way on the left. But in reality, we are really wanting to head toward liberation, where we won't need any of these boxes. But for the meantime, we need equity before we can reach equality and final liberation. So I do believe in talking and taking turns listening with people and having a chance to clear my mind, and out of that comes action. There is a lot of action we get to take. We get to face what the racism is. There's so many ways to learn and really face what racism has done and is doing as we speak. And then an important part of the facing is feeling and healing. Otherwise, all those pent up, unfaced and unreleased feelings do confuse our behavior, our body language. And we want to do that in safe, set aside, agreed upon places and times that are very easily set up. And we want to be building new connections. This is, I think, a really important part of Jennifer Everhart's research, showing that as we build new connections, those stereotypes in our minds dissipate. It's like breaking glass, that this stereotype that was so rigid now has new pieces to it. Now there are Black men in our lives that we love and are dear, and who spend the night. Our youngest son made best friends with a young man who's African American, and he ended up doing a lot of his growing up in our house because of social circumstances that he was under, which was wonderful. And we all learned and loved, and he remains a vital part of our life. So these decisions that we make change our lives way for the better. And we, even now in the time of COVID, we can be physically distant and socially close. That young man is no longer spending the night at our house. He's got his own house and his own children, but we play in the yard. So we can still make new friends. We can join clubs, community groups. Again, before COVID, we could sing in choirs. I want to put in a plug for the Clarence Smith Community Chorus if anyone would like to join. And we can take a stand everywhere, anywhere, interrupting language, jokes. We can write, we can witness everywhere we are, with joy, with an invitation, with a smile, not with a finger point or castigation. That doesn't move anyone forward. We can do this with love and change a heart. And as we change more and more hearts and we change policy needs to change as well at every level. We will be reaching the society that we have in our dreams. There's so many books we can read. This is another part of educating ourselves. There's plenty to read. And for all of us, finding our own people. Who are my people? And I will say that my German and English heritage, my family was quite relaxed about. That was my mom's side. My dad's side was all Irish. Both of his parents were of Irish heritage. That was completely hidden from me and from all my cousins until that generation was all dead. They immigrated to Toledo. We found all sorts of stories. My father's father, so my grandfather actually was raised in an orphanage, with St. Vincent Orphanage, because his mother died and this Irish family didn't want to spoil these boys. So they were put in a Catholic orphanage. That level of assimilation, that level of denial of who we are as a people, lost language, lost everything in order to fit into this US culture, that being Irish and Catholic was not okay. And that is a seedbed for those people to now oppress others. And I can describe to you, I won't, but my father's mother's attitude, and it wasn't, I mean, it was about other white immigrants that she would look down on. And it was so clearly a result of what had happened to her parents coming from Ireland. So finding out who our people are and what their stories are is very revealing. We get to take a stand. We get to have a motto. We get to welcome people to a world without racism. Ending our conversation with the checkout person at the grocery store, you know, have a good day and here's to a world without racism to you. You know, it's a smile, it's a hope. These phrases get to be in our minds. These are our screensavers on our computers and in our minds. And this is an action we get to take with everyone. I again turn to the YW as my cornerstone of an organization that fit my mother and me to a T. The combination of ending racism and empowering women was a home base. And we get to back Black women who are leading. Black women have changed our society in so many ways. They are leaders in their families and their communities, and it is time that they are more and more elevated to leading more and more broadly. And so we get to listen, we get to follow, we get to collaborate. And I do want to turn this to Lisa. So Lisa, you can talk a little bit about the YW, and then really I just have a picture slide at the end and questions, but I want you to feature all that the YW is doing currently. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oatis. You were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. There's a couple of things that I would love to share with our listening audience virtually about the YWCA. As Dr. Oatis mentioned, you know, we've been a part of the fabric of Northwest Ohio for a very long time, actually 150 years to be exact. This year, 2020, is our anniversary. And a part of what we've been doing, in addition to what many people recognize us for in terms of our empowerment of women, is working very tirelessly on the efforts to dismantle racism. We do a number of different things in the community, especially now in lieu of what's happened all across not only our country, but in other countries and around the world. There's a heightened sense to step in and be a part of the movement. And so we are welcoming that in a number of variety of different fronts. We have book groups happening all across the community, and you can go to our website to get more information about when the sessions are happening. But for each book, there's 2 discussions that's going along with that. We have a wonderful facilitator, Christine Nash, that's actually leading us in that effort. We also just concluded a 21-day racial justice equity challenge, all electronic, where every single day for 21 days, we sent you a resource list of possible things you could do really to strengthen your racial justice muscle. From podcasts to different articles, all the way to reading books. And that was done for 21 days with really the intent in mind that once you do something long enough, it becomes a habit. And so 21 days is about scientifically what the researchers are telling us. So we have been able to do that. We actually did it in the midst of COVID, and then after the murder of Mr. Floyd, we launched it again and had an overwhelming response. So we will be doing it again in just a couple of months. I also would love to share with you information about Dialogue to Change. We have a wonderful group of facilitators that really came to the YWCA. It's been about 4 years now. Reverend Karen Shepler, in fact, the late Reverend Karen Shepler, approached the YWCA to take this program on. And we have been working very diligently to get dedicated funds, to hire staff, to help us really operationalize this program and take it to a higher level. I'm really pleased to acknowledge that the city, as well as the county, last year in 2019, actually gave us dedicated funds to hire staff. And so we were working to launch Dialogue to Change sessions all over the community, and then COVID hit. And so it's taken us just a little bit of time to get ourselves organized virtually. And I am so pleased to tell you that we launched virtually just this past Monday, very successfully. So if you are interested in attending a dialogue, please contact us at any time so we can get that scheduled. Similar to what you saw Dr. Oatis share from the YWCA St. Louis, we have retooled our Dialogue to Change. We now offer same race dialogues, 2 sessions worth. And then the 4th session, we bring diverse groups together to talk about what they've learned in their individual sessions. But we believed it was important to really set up a brave space for folks to come together and talk about everything you heard, in fact, the representative from YW St. Louis talk about. We know and understand that there are a ton of resources out there. And in many instances, people of color, in particular Black people, have been put in the position to be the educators. We believe that there are enough resources out there that, you know, if you are really interested in learning and understanding, that you can seek them. So initially when we had dialogue together, the experience would lend itself to people of color sharing their experiences and allowing the white people in the session to get an aha moment and go, oh, okay, so I get it. Let me ask you a few questions about that. So it's just a different format, and it seemed to be working really well. It allows now Black people the opportunity to say some things in a setting that in other instances, sometimes white people may not necessarily get it and understand. It also allows now for white people an opportunity to say whatever it is they think they need to say, ask it how they need to ask it, question it how they need to question it, and it will be led by trained facilitators that are really subject matter experts to really help really move the needle when it comes to doing this work. You know, the other thing I want to say, and I made a little note as Dr. Oatis was talking, and that was really about the video that she shared that the Georgetown students made. There, I think it was powerful on a lot of different fronts, because at any given time, any person of color could be in that video. It's not just Georgetown. It's where people work, it's where people go to school, it's the very community they live in. And so if you take the context of what was really being shared, you know, my challenge to our listening audience really is, how many of you are working with and around and working for Black people and other folks of color that can't breathe? And if you know they can't breathe, what are you doing to help them breathe? If you're a doctor, if you're a social worker, if you're a caseworker, what are you doing to help them? What is your agency doing to help them. It's a little beyond pale to think that all we think we need to do is write a media release that says we denounce it. Words are important, but we need action. And as Dr. Oatis, I think so eloquently said, it cannot be and should not be just people of color demanding action. So I will pause. It looks like there are a couple of questions. Marla, are you able to read the questions?
Sure. So question 1, I have asked this question before and have never really gotten much of an answer. How do I convince my generally well-intentioned white middle-class friends that white privilege is not an insult, but it exists passively and systemic racism is still in effect in society?
Dr. Oatis, do you want to take that?
Gladly. I think that the woman who wrote the book had quite a correct perspective, and that is to make an invitation to that person to talk about it, and to talk about their feelings, talk about their concerns, talk about their worries, because and to talk about their growing up, you know, what did they learn, what was it like, because these confusions that people have came in for a very good reason. I mean, I have friends in Toledo, Ohio, who grew up with families who lynched African-American people. Now, my friend had made a complete decision not to do that, but she carried all of that fear and training and misinformation. So she struggled to build relationships with people of African heritage just because of all that was behind that. There are stories of horror, of separation, of sadness, in people who are defensive about facing racism. And I think coming with a smile and with warmth and with love and you know, a loaf of bread or some peach cobbler, makes it a human, loving time to listen to probably some very hard stories about childhood. And I don't know what they are, or young adulthood, I know, teenage years, whatever the stories are that drive people to that corner, are worth hearing, and for them to understand how they got there. And it's not going to be one conversation. And I'm not saying these are easy. Oh, believe me, I am not. They aren't. But no one, and coming from a medical training, let me tell you, medical training in my day was very much based on harsh criticism. You know, come down hard on these, insult these students, you know, be harsh. It is not a good way of learning. And any of us who have been in educational settings like that know that doesn't promote learning. It promotes additional defensiveness. So to come with an open heart, to come with love, and finding common ground, it's a process. It's a process, and I appreciate the listener for asking the question. You are heading exactly the right direction. This is one heart and one mind at a time. We can change policy, and we certainly have changed policies in this country. We've changed laws in this country. We've done a lot in this country. But until we actually heal from the hurts that racism have placed on all of us, this is about hearts and minds and spirits, also needing to heal in the process of changing more laws and changing more policies.
Dr. Oatis, let me ask a follow-up question based on what the question was, because I think it is really one of those questions that I hear a lot of discussion about. People struggle with understanding the term white privilege. They equate it to you know, I don't have that much money, or I don't have that kind of wealth. You know, I don't have white privilege. You know, talk a little bit about that in the context of helping people understand really the vast difference of really what the definition of the term is.
Thank you. And I had that exact conversation with a very, very close friend who I respect a lot. Recently, and it was exactly on that term. It is common, and I think, in my experience, to ask questions of that person. So this was a white man. You know, when you're driving in your neighborhood or any neighborhood, do you wonder about the police stopping you? Well, no, not even if I'm speeding. I probably just get a ticket in the mail. I mean, and do you, when you go in a store, what happens when you go in a store, or used to go in a store? What happens? What's it like? You know, those kinds of questions that are about everyday life. And then to ask the same question, you know, what do your Black friends say it's like when they're driving through their own neighborhood, much less, you know, their own African-American neighborhood, much less a white suburban neighborhood. Now, that may point out a couple things. Well, I don't have any Black friends. Now, why do you suppose? And what's that like? And you know, what do you think you might be missing? I think the more we can hear ourselves think and describe our own positions and our own gaps in knowledge, that's how we learn. We learn much better than by somebody saying, I can't believe you think that. And, you know, I have some examples of people that, you know, I asked a question and this man was adamantly opposed, you know, he was adamantly opposed to, you know, my question to him. And he talked and 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 talked. And I listened and listened. This was easy because he wasn't a friend or a relative. He was a stranger. And he came right around a circle and said, you know, I don't think we should da-da-da. I mean, I don't need to go into those details. And I'll never forget it. And I said, well, thank you so much for this time together. I appreciate it. He talked himself into it, or out of it, whatever you want to say. This was a slightly easier topic. This was about bombing people. And but I think that methodology lets people explore their own minds and their own experience, and see where their gaps in knowledge are. What is it like for a Black person to walk in a store? Well, maybe they don't know. Yeah, I think getting people to talk is useful, and hearing some pretty harsh things without jumping down people's throats is, I'm saying, I'm a mother's daughter. I still find that really hard. I try.
Love it, love it. Marla, next question, please.
Sure. For Dr. Oatis, can you share your thoughts on steps healthcare providers can take to reduce racism in patient care?
Great question. And I do think that what we have described in this talk of facing one's own racism, you know, I've been at this really given my mother, since my teen years, and in different you know, in different ways, in different studies and in different, but it is a lifetime process. But I think that we start with facing what our lives were like. Another woman, another Black woman I have followed for many years named Barbara Love, who some of you may have met. She came and she came here and did something. She continues to be one of the most brilliant people on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. Barbara talked about telling our life story as white people. So I was born in a hospital with other white mothers and fathers and white babies. I grew up in a white neighborhood. I mean, to sort of face the isolation and segregation of our lives, and then where maybe we didn't grow up in a white neighborhood, but we grew up in a such and such neighborhood, and here were the attitudes my parents and family had toward the other people in the neighborhood. But to really tell that story, and to tell that story over and over again, and then to be able to make intentionally new connections. And I'll never forget Barbara standing up and saying, yep, you need to go out and make some Black friends. She said, and if somebody asks you, why do you want to be my friend? Just say, Barbara Love told me to. She said, you've not made friends with people that are African heritage for your whole lives. So now go do it. And I'll never forget doing this as a young adult. And my dear friend she kind of looked quizzically at me, but I liked her. And we did. And we did develop a wonderful friendship. And it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot. So I think that this is not a quick fix. And for those of us in healthcare, we get to lead by example. We get to do this work ourselves, and we can gather people around us. I am very proud, I will say, of our Mercy system. We have a huge system-wide initiative on ending racism that is rolling out, and I've signed up for my first experience, and it's substantial. So we get to help our workplaces do this. We get to do this with our families, but I think in healthcare, it's about doing the work personally and owning our goodness. I don't come into this work, hating white people. That's not the point. That is so not the point. The point is for me to get closer and closer to white people. As I expand my friendships, to people who look and grew up differently than me, I also want to have really close, loving, counting on relationships with my beloved white people. That's not the answer. We're good. We're good people. We do some bad things. But this isn't about finger pointing, and we can do that in healthcare on a very personal level, and at a particular clinic situation, we can bring our team along, and it's not simple, it's not quick, it's not easy, but I do believe, and my experience is, if it's done with love and fun, that it enriches everyone's life. It enriches everyone's life. Yeah.
So Kim, I have to tell you, as well as the listening audience, here's a little bit of information. You get it before most of the rest of the community will, but we are actually bringing Barbara Love to Northwest Ohio, along with the legendary Jane Elliott again. So look for information later, probably next month, maybe mid-month. We are doing our annual Stand Against Racism event, which typically would have been in April, and Barbara Love was going to keynote. And so we've rescheduled. We think it's going to be the last week in October, but the moment we get things firmed up, I'll let you know. And then most of you know the wonderful Jane Elliott. We brought her here last year. They're both going to double team Northwest Ohio and really put out a call to action so that we as a community are unified in really our approach to addressing strategies to dismantle and end racism. So for sure.
Congratulations. That's not a small accomplishment. She's busy all over the world, and I'm thrilled.
Actually both of them are. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sweet.
Okay.
Question. Yes.
Question. Dr. Oatis, you mentioned that Black doctors have better outcomes with Black babies. Can you elaborate on why?
That's a very good question. All the study that that would be conjecture, purely conjecture. That was a retrospective study of a million, I think 1.8 million charts. So all that study is doing is counting numbers. It's just strictly a quantitative study. The whys will need to be answered. The implication of that study, because the white babies did about the same as, it didn't matter for the white babies. And this was in their first year of life. And this was hospitalized babies. This is different than the other study. This is babies that were in the hospital. So most of them were, had some complexity, were sick. And mostly these were babies born in hospitals that had a large percentage of Black babies born there. So the inference is that there's some institutional bias, some institutional, not the best of excellent care given to these babies for whatever reason. Now, they were not able to do simultaneous to that chart review study to use the implicit bias test. There's we can all go and measure our own implicit bias. If you Google implicit bias test, there's a Harvard test. I think it's the IAT or the AIT, I forget these initials. IAT, implicit something. Anyway, implicit attitude test. You can take that test to, and it's fun. It's all on, do it on your cell phone or on the computer. It's revealing of what those implicit biases are. And that kind of work couldn't be done because, this is long over. And I will say this is a problem of research in our country. Much research in our country is driven by pharmaceutical and people who make stuff, make new gizmos to go in our body. They have money. Those are sponsored, industry-sponsored research. This kind of research, no, there isn't a lot of money devoted to this kind of research, which is very labor intensive to do these kind of looks at implicit bias or at explicit bias. There is still plenty of explicit bias, but nobody's going to make money off that. So it's very difficult to get sponsored research. This would be NIH research. This would be the National Science Foundation. There are groups that do it, but it's, again, racism affects those decisions. Research that is going to point this out is the people in charge of that money are not eager to point this out. The same with women. Research has been done sort of classically, looking at outcomes for white men. So I do want to say that as I've done a fair amount of research looking at implicit bias research. The old research, the research from the 80s and 90s was pretty horribly revealing about the levels of implicit bias, say looking at white cardiologists and their attitude toward a scripted patient. No, the patients are actors and actresses. It's not real, but the dialogue is exactly the same. So if I presented with chest pain and whatever my symptoms are, and Lisa presented with the same, and a white man and a black man presented, the white man would get Cadillac treatment. The white woman would get, Ford treatment. The black man would get maybe, horse cart treatment, and the black woman would get, good luck with these walking shoes we're going to give you. The difference in treatment was dramatic. Same script, same everything, just a different looking patient. Now that research is old, and I've been looking for new research that duplicated that, and I haven't been able to find it. There was some trauma research that looked at the fact that if you're in the trauma bay, and your outcomes, there was no difference, which was very interesting to me. Not a lot of studies, small research, but there isn't a lot of, whoops, where did I go? Did I lose you?
Nope,
you're still here.
Okay, good. Oh my gosh, my screen flipped. In the trauma bay, it's, the decisions are made in a split second, and it's a different situation than the cardiologist looking at a person and their symptoms. So there's still a lot we can do. There's still a lot we can do. We have a lot of opportunities, people like to say.
Okay, next question. I experienced a situation where there were a group of white males discussing the riots and protesting. My thought was, your laws are not equal for people of color, and there is a difference between the rioting and protesting. My question is, how do you get them to see that they are the issue when they say that we're the problem? It's not policy because they are in power to make the policies.
Again, I think that that's a really, really good question and a very good point. And I think that I will quote the speak truth to power. And we want to be interacting with those white men with respect, with compassion, without compromise, with integrity, and to be able to find out, what are their concerns, what are their worries, and then be able to voice our clarity about the importance of peaceful protest, find common ground. None of us are interested in store windows being crashed into. Find the place where we can agree. Yes, I agree with you. I really do agree with you on that. And what about the issue of peaceful protest? And ask them, who's making the policies? Who do you see as having made the policies? Who is it that's the chief of the police, or the mayor, or the president, or, who do you see that historically have been the preponderance of the people making these policies? So again, have them face the truth, and say little, but when we have something to say, it wants to be clear, pithy, and to the point.
And do you know what, Dr. Oatis, if I could, I would love to share, part of what I think is important for all Americans to remember is the history of this country was really set up in such a way that if you didn't make noise, you were totally excluded and ignored. There would not be even an opportunity for Dr. Oatis to have become a doctor, because at one point in history, women, regardless of the color of your skin, did not have the same rights as males. And so what happened? Women took to the streets. There were protests and demonstrations, such as the same being the civil rights movement. And there were protests and demonstrations. So it is really an opportunity for all Americans, all folks, quite frankly, all around the world, to come out collectively and push and mandate change. That is a part of our everyday democracy. It is what we are allowed to do, and quite frankly, it is what we should do when we see that the powers and authority haven't moved things or adjusted things to accommodate whatever the needs are that are being addressed. So people can look at it, you know, I'll say this and touch on it slightly, you know, it's become political, and it really is not political at all. It's about human rights. And once you take a step back, and I think as Dr. Oatis shared in one of the videos, the question was, if the Black Lives Movement was really about white lives, because police officers were killing white boys and white men, would we think that there's something wrong with trying to speak up on behalf of Black lives? Now, for some people in this country, let's just talk about America, they still don't value Black people as human beings. They don't value people of color as human beings. So not everyone is going to answer that question equally from a place of equity. But for those folks who know that I'm a woman just as Dr. Oatis is a woman, I have a brain just as Dr. Oatis has a brain, I have children and love and adore my children just as Dr. Oatis does, why wouldn't I want to take to the mountaintop and scream for change to ensure that my children have a right to live just as Dr. Oatis's children have a right to live? That's not a political movement. It's not red nor blue or green. It's red blood that's being shared on our streets all across our country. So for that reason, and that reason alone, all people should avail themselves to trying to understand really what the movement and the demonstrations and the protests are about.
And Lisa, thank you. And our very beginning protest that we laud was the Boston Tea Party. Now, that was looting. That was breaking store windows. That was destroying property. But boy, it got people's attention. Not that I'm saying we need to do that, but there is a place in our history that we now look back on with great pride. So yes, and there's no reason for me not to go to the mountaintop with you. That this is about all of us. This is about me on the mountaintop with you in those demonstrations. And I heard this recently, again, a very helpful comment. The young man who was in the church that shot, I don't know, I don't remember numbers very well, but the South Carolina church, and he killed how many? 9 members. Yes. Right. 9 of them. Yes. Well, he wasn't shot by the police. He was taken alive, and he was taken to Burger King. They didn't want him to be hungry. There was another white man who was in a standoff with the police. He already shot a bunch of people. He was in a standoff with the police, like a shootout with the police. They took him alive. I mean, so yeah, we have to be willing to allow yourself to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Correct. We can talk education all day long in trying to impart some knowledge, some history, but at the end of the day, as Dr. Oatis referenced, you know, for the most part, we're surrounded by good people doing good things. But if there is a possibility that you are operating on a thinking error, wouldn't you want to know that? Wouldn't you want to adjust that? And that's really what ending racism is all about. Good people that may have been taught stereotypes that are ingrained in them, that some kind of way now spill over into practices
that may be embedded in policies and agencies. And so if you don't come to terms with that and be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, be willing to throw something out the window, even though it's been the way we've done it for the last 25 years, then we're just going to keep on doing what we're doing. And quite frankly, across all sectors, as Dr. Oatis mentioned, you know, we will continue to see the disparities we're seeing. And, you know, I think as Americans, and again, this is happening all over the world, but as Americans, the video of the murder of a Black man really opened a lot of eyes. You know, some people of color, including me, was not surprised. We've known that there have been countless murders. We didn't need a video to tell us because we know what happens. And just as many people said to me, oh my gosh, Lisa, it's never going to happen again after George Floyd. And guess what? I don't know what you saw on your news just the other day, but I saw a man shot 7 times in front of his kids. Now, I don't care what he did. It doesn't matter what he did. But the difference here in treatment of people from a place of equity, even based on the example that Dr. Oatis just shared, is stark and staring. We don't treat people the same. And so why an unarmed man with his back to you needs to be shot 7 times, I don't have an answer. But we should all be enraged, all of us. And so it's going to take, again, going back to the question, peaceful protests, people speaking out to force policies to change. So anyway, it's going to change. All right, we are nearing our time. Marla, any other questions or can we wrap this up?
I think one similar question, someone is looking for how to help white friends make the connection when their attitude is, so Black people are followed around in a store from time to time, or you might deal with a bad cop from time to time. All of us have to deal with something.
Dr. Oatis, you want to take that?
My response to that would be, I have 2 white sons and an African-American son. I do not have any concerns about my 2 white, let me do my fingers, 2 white sons driving in their cars, traveling in their homes. I have no concerns. I will tell you that I spent years of my African-American sons, you know, middle school through, you know, early 20s, scared every day that he was going to just get shot. He'd just be dead. He's large, he's tall, he's beautiful, and people are scared of him. He's a teddy bear. He's a marshmallow on the inside, but he is a large Black man. And that terror is, that's, you ask any Black mother, there, a lot of nights I cried because I didn't know he was, you know, he was in high school and he wasn't, you know, he had disappeared, you know, all this stuff. I mean, and he's a wonderful kid. He's a wonderful young man. So that level of fear and terror on a daily basis, it's not an accident that African-American men have higher levels of hypertension. I mean, duh. That's inexcusable. That would be my response. Ideally with not quite that edge in my voice, but I can't help it.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the virtual world, we have come to the conclusion of our time. It's certainly my hope that from wherever you are, home or in the office, that you are applauding Dr. Oatis for her time and her talent that she has shared with us. I want to remind you to please go to the YWCA website to get further information. There's a whole list of resources to, again, help strengthen your racial justice muscle. And we encourage you to reach out and talk with some friends and contact us to set up a dialogue to change. It really is going to start with simple communication in order to move the needle on a personal level, as well as even as a collective in our agencies and in our community. Dr. Oatis, thank you again for your time. Jan Ruma, thank you for allowing me to wear two hats and for hosting this with me on behalf of Healthy Lucas County. It's been great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.